AI Create presents Hairy Topics.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hairy Topics, where we talk about the big questions in creativity and AI and the even bigger implications that come about. Today, we're really lucky to be joined by some amazing guests who are doing some amazing work, and I'm not going to try to steal their thunder, but one, my partner in crime, Adam, and then Nico, who's really going to share a lot of amazing workflow work, but I'm going to let and creative thinking. So I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself and we'll go from there. Nico, tell us a bit about what you're up to and what you do.
Okay, so I start from scratch for those who don't know me, which are probably most people. So my name is Nico Casavecchia. I'm a filmmaker from Argentina, based in Los Angeles. And I guess you could define my work as someone who tells human stories using technology. I've been doing this for the last whatever years. And so I'm excited to talk about what's coming at us right now, which is a lot, actually.
Adam, do you want to give the people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm one of the founders of AI Create. I'm also a creative director at Django, which is an experiential company, which I also founded 8 years ago. I also co-founded a small creative studio called Ay Caramba. It's basically a sort of playground for all sorts of creations, especially those that carry a lot of AI.
I think this is poised to be a great discussion. We've got filmmaker who tells stories and crafts stories. We've got experience maker who crafts real life experiences. And this is, I think, the intersection that to me is exciting about AI is how is it going to change the way we perceive, engage, create stories, and make that narrative happen. I'm going to kind of ask you both, like, what has you most excited right now? Nico, you said there's a lot to come. What's already changed that you're seeing? What has you super excited?
It's a sea change like I haven't seen in my career. And I've seen a lot of, like, I'm old enough to have seen a lot of different changes. I came of age when I started as a graphic designer, and I came of age when like the tools were mature enough that had shifted the landscape of design and motion graphics. And eventually I evolved into a storyteller, a filmmaker. What I'm seeing now is kind of like a silent revolution that is happening on, I think, a little bit underground, because everybody's using AI. Nobody is really publicly admitting it because we don't know the etiquette of what is appropriate to tell, and what, we are all fearful of the consequences of. Mostly, I think, I would argue that is labor replacement. I think is the biggest topic in everybody's mind. Everything else, I think, is secondary to labor replacement, which is the biggest fear. So nobody really wants to go out and say, okay, this is what I'm using it for. Like, I have two main focus in my work. I have a narrative work. I did a feature film, did a bunch of short films, right? So that's my film work. And I think for that world, I'm seeing a lot of deals being made, like a lot of studios going to AI studios, a lot of tech companies making deals. And sometimes those are announced and we can see them publicly. Sometimes they're not announced. And in the commercial space, what I'm seeing is a huge impact on pre-production and visualization. So we, as commercial directors, we have to basically pitch for every job. So we hunt for our meals. That has made AI a tool of visualization. So you can see agencies showing you decks that are, made with AI or have supported materials with AI. And we are also, everybody really is using AI to visualize their ideas before going into production. Now, what I'm starting to see on the last 3 months is now a shift into, for some markets, not specifically the US market, which is more regulated and more fearful of change, I would say. It's more professionalized. There's more money, so there's more to be lost. But for markets, let's say Latin America and Middle East, what I'm seeing is people are starting to use AI as an output. So you start to see shots being made in AI. You start seeing transitions, little VFX work being done, because for some reason, people don't care so much. Companies are not so worried about having legal problems, which in the US is different. More to lose, I would say. So those are the kind of like the things I'm seeing right now. But honestly, it changes every day at a pace that I haven't seen before.
I mean, you said in the middle of that, you said no one's really talking about how they're using it because so I'm going to ask you the direct question, how are you using it?
I don't mind to admit it. Like, it's been for me one probably of the quickest shifts on every single workflow that I have. And I am a person that loves to try new things. So I'm the target audience for this kind of tools, I guess. I have my hands on a lot of different pies, right? For me, it's been a revolution. Mainly I'm from Argentina. I learned English by experience. I dropped out of college. So, and I write screenplays, I write essays, and I write articles and I write treatments, right? I'm writing all the time. And for someone who's always working in a second language, has been incredible because I can write and then rewrite. I don't trust the AI to write for me, but I do trust the AI to tell me alternatives to what I wrote. And that's been a huge deal for me. So that's the most basic layer. I would say on top of that, I'm a designer, I'm an illustrator. So having a conversation with something that I can go back and forth with and just improving design and working on ideas. So ideation, another big area, I would say. And then finally, I'm starting to wet my feet on output, which I haven't touched until now because it wasn't ready. But I'm very impressed. I mean, there's no way around it. Like, you have to see this at face value. There's no way around it. The output of these systems right now are extremely, extremely powerful in a way that they weren't 3 months ago. And I was a skeptic, but I'm starting to see the potential of execution after all ideation and pre-production.
I really want to dive into that, but I'd also love to hear from Adam. When you think about the kind of work that you're doing, Adam, is your experience roughly the same? How are you starting to play with AI to drive your creative output?
For ideation, it's incredible. The agility it gives me and it gives the rest of the team has just made all the process a lot faster. Departments get to understand other departments a lot faster. Instead of having a mood board, all of a sudden you have an actual idea being transmitted very clearly in terms of aesthetic and look and feel. That, at least from in the experiential side. In terms of being able to create stories, create images that you're using for a campaign as output, I think it's very interesting. And I think one of the questions I'd like to Nico is, in terms of the whole process, is multiple iterations. You create a prompt and you get different options. Then you create more options in relation to one direction and more options and more options. So this iterative process opens up sometimes windows, doors that you weren't expecting. And I think that's what's really interesting, because you can have a what if this idea went from A to Z, but all of a sudden it's not a straight line. You hit F and F goes all the way up, goes in a completely different direction than you were expecting, but it's super exciting. It's out of the box, but it still stems from that initial what if. So I think that for me is what's really exciting. And I sometimes think about it like when I'm making music and I'm messing around with synthesizer sounds or whatever, and you're making funny sounds, and all of a sudden this funny sound matches this other funny sound, but you couldn't anticipate it until you played with it. So it's like a playground. In terms of ideation, for me, I think it's fantastic. In terms of output, it's been a bit of a wild beast for some time. And now I think the levels of control have increased to a point where you can actually get an output that you really wanted to get when you prompted it initially. Whereas, as Nico says, 3 months ago, a year ago, it was like hit and miss, right? So I don't know. Do you go through that, Nico, in terms of iteration? Like when you're working, like you're looking for that scene or whatever, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, that's weird, but it works, or no?
I think it favors risk taking in a way that I haven't seen before. Filmmaking is very expensive, very hard to do, I would say, until now. It's very hard to try ideas. You never know if they're going to work. And this, I think, encourages risk taking in that things can get weird because you can allow yourself to execute on a level that before it would be too risky, maybe to write, basically to risk capital on something that would not work or be commercially viable. But now you can show those ideas and really communicate, which is honestly, I think the biggest struggle for any artist is to say, all right, what I have in my head, this feeling, this poetic kind of interpretation of reality, how can I translate that into a bunch of decisions that are going to end up communicating that same feeling to a certain extent to an audience? I think that's maybe the definition of art. Well, this gets you closer to that, and that you can iterate and do that. Having said that, as everybody knows, as any artist knows, there is a huge risk on this onanism that comes with infinite possibility. I think the infinite possibilities of AI can get you lost in experimentation. And I've seen a lot of that and I think sometimes that's in detriment of substance. Substance is very important. So what I see is like a 99% of work being done in AI is very vapid, is very shallow, is not really interesting. It doesn't say anything, just because you can see how people got lost in exploration of the surface, which surface is beautiful. I love style and I love aesthetics. I've seen only a few examples. I count them with the fingers in my hands, the examples of things that I think are of any substance or artistic relevance done with AI yet. Everything else is an experiment or done by people who are not really trained on communicating ideas.
I think that's fair. You made the point earlier that this technology is encouraging risk. And risk in new toys, there's going to be a level of experimentation. That said, there is a reason why we have fundamentals to good storytelling. How this starts to reinvent that craft is the interesting part to me. My question would be, do you have any indications that you're starting to see about, here's ways that we weren't able to tell stories before? What's coming that's going to change it? Because storytelling has always been beginning, middle, and end. But I'm going to walk you along a path from the beginning, middle to the end. And the question that I have is, Adam, you talked about kind of more experiential elements. Are we starting to see fragmentation in the way we can actually tell stories too from this technology? Are we starting to open up our canvas in the way technology tends to open a canvas? How does that happen with film? What happened with storytelling? We've had such a long time in one direction. I don't know if you've put any thought into that. I'm just curious.
I think that when you think about this, a new art form or a new technology like this, you have to look at the incentive. Sometimes I like to go back into history to just try to understand all the sea changes. If you look at the turn of the century, cinema is developed. Like it's a stool of three legs. You have distribution, you have technology, and you have the artist, right? And you have people like the Lumiere brothers, right, who are perfecting the camera with an eye on creation, right? So they're starting to think, okay, this may be like a vaudeville thing where we bring a bunch of people together to see a show. We know vaudeville works. We know we can make money out of it. Content part will be, we're going to go around the world and shoot a bunch of different exotic places. So, people in France will be able to see Japan or whatever, right? And then finally, there's a technological leg of that stool, which is, okay, we have this camera, so we have these projectors. There's a huge debate at the turn of the century of like, is the camera the projector? Is the same object? Is it an individual thing? Americans are experimenting with ways of projecting movies, ironically, that are individualistic, where you just look into a thing and that is your projector. You're looking at an experience that only you get. The French are trying to do this as vaudeville, like a show. And eventually that will win and become cinema. When you think about incentives right now, I think the big incentive here is social media. So what you're seeing in the storytelling front being done with AI mainly is little clips that gain views on social media. It's easily monetizable. People that are not storytellers are very fluent in creating social media content, right? And sometimes, as I said before, it's like a short reel of something shocking that, captures your attention, is a deep fake, is like a weird monster, is an uncanny thing, And that is, it to a certain extent, a primitive way of storytelling. It's, the same way that, turning to the example before, like vaudeville can be, this physical comedy, or it can be cinema. This is the same happening here. My fear is that when I think we are kind of the same generation. When we think about new tools, what we get excited about is like, okay, we're going to be able to do independent cinema like we never done before, which is unbounded by budgets and creative restrictions. And what I feel is happening is that this will create, because of the incentives at place, which are definitely not in favor of cinema, I would say this is going to create its own genre that will not be something that we understand as cinema. I mean, because cinema is my focus and I think it will be hugely impacted. I'm not sure, okay, this is the future of cinema. I think what we're going to see is like new ways of entertainment, the same way as YouTube was not like everybody thought, okay, now everybody will do movies. Well, no, everybody will show their house. Everybody will talk about like how to iron a shirt, but not necessarily. I mean, part of it will be little movies, but movies will be movies.
If you've got someone who can tell me how to iron a shirt, I'm really happy about that. I'll take that person right now. I should probably look that up on YouTube. Is what I should do.
I think also the fact that a little bit like when Pro Tools, Ableton, Final Cut, Premiere, all these programs came in, which cut the professionals in a really expensive studio to hire. When that was cut back to you and your desktop computer, it gave people a lot of freedom. And for better or for worse, it allowed everyone the possibility to learn how to use Premiere, edit the video, and do a little movie, regardless of the quality of that movie, no? A movie, clip, reel, whatever, no? This goes a step beyond. You can actually compose the music right now in terms of the story you tell it and ask it to come up with lyrics. Admittedly, it's sometimes a little basic and so on, no? But it allows you to make the music, make the sound effects, create funky camera movements, help you with the edit, and do a lot of stuff that before was very expensive and very complicated. Does it simplify all those mediums into presets, making them a little bit boring and plain? Probably. But it gives that possibility. I was speaking with a friend and he was telling me his kids on TikTok can edit videos and in a way that he could never have dreamt of when he was a kid. So I think we're getting to that point where these tools, these new gadgets allow for a lot more in terms of storytelling.
But at the same time, when you look at that, and your example of music is a perfect one, because at the same time, what you've got, right, is you've got a synthesizer that can replicate any sound, any instrument in a convincing way. And yet there is still, at a production level, a preference by many people to bring in an orchestra and go actually recording an orchestra together. When you think about AI, Nico, you're thinking about the work that you're doing, traveling around. When you think about kind of traditional production techniques in AI, how are those blending right now? And where do you think actually we're still going to rely on some traditional techniques? Or do you think AI is really going to disrupt everything?
Listen, when you go to the Central Park and you want to take a stroll, maybe the most preferable, most beautiful way to take a stroll is a buggy with horses, right? Like you can hire a guy who brings you around on this chariot and you go around the park pulled by horses. And some would say that's the most beautiful way. That doesn't mean that people go around the Central Park with horses just because there's no economical incentives to do that. So this is kind of the same thing. That's the bad news, right? But when you create a new tool that puts pressure on the price on the market like this, and I talk about economics because I found myself not because excited about economics, but so many times as a filmmaker, I am so oppressed by economics that, I'm really aware of it and I want to be realistic. Yes, the preferable thing is to use real instruments, but the truth is, for the majority of things being created, you don't have the luxury of instruments. And when you have a tool that brings down the cost at a very good quality, well, now you're talking about the McDonald's of art is enough that you're not going to go starve like bad quality calories, but it tastes good. That's the problem, I think, with AI. And to that point, I am not an AI evangelist. I am not, I'm an optimist in that I think that there's some good things that will come out of it, but definitely this is a thing that will touch a lot of lives. Those elite cases like you're mentioning, and we were talking offline before about film, right? Like when, of course, we all love shooting in film. Why? Because it makes us look great in front of our friends, make them very envious.
So you're honest. Let's go with that. Okay.
We shot on film and you can tell like the highlights look great on film, like shit like that, which is, but the truth is most of the times we're shooting digital just because the economics are not there for shooting in film. So there will be elite cases that will be edge cases where those traditional techniques will stay. I think that will become more valuable. I think those who are very good and very well versed on traditional techniques and have a place of status around them. Let's say, for example, if you're a filmmaker that shoots film and you're braggy about it, would hold to film for dear life, because that's going to be your edge, the thing that makes you special. You are a watercolor artist, you're in good luck because there's a story to tell about a watercolor artist. Now, if you're a digital artist, you should be worried because this is coming for you. Like if you are at the middle or the bottom of the food chain when it comes to commercial art in particular, I would say these are going to be putting a lot of pressure in those areas, basically price pressure. Like a lot of new people will come from the bottom up and put pressure on the middle part of the food chain for artists.
You've just been traveling around, you've been in the Middle East, you've been to a bunch of, when you look at how you're trying to blend AI and traditional techniques, can you give us a bit of a detail of like, what would you just never bother with the traditional model anymore. Whether that's the ideation process or the production process. Where are things better? How is it changing what you do?
Listen, as I told you before, it's early days for output, right? I do a lot of things myself. So if you hate me out there because I'm replacing people, the good thing is I'm a very, very hands-on artist and filmmaker. So because I've done all these things myself, I wouldn't do them again the same way I was doing them. And it starts with storyboard. I do my own storyboards. I'm not replacing storyboard artists. I really don't recommend this. Storyboard artists are amazing in collaborating with. They can give you perspective on camera angles. They can give you perspective on storytelling. They're a very important part of the filmmaking process. Having said that, most times, and especially for commercials, you really are kind of like struggling with the speed and the way that you do your own storyboards. I am using AI to storyboard right now. I think it's at a place where that can happen. It's a hybrid process. I'm not prompting something and that's it. I'm drawing, I'm showing sketches to the thing, and the thing is outputting some drawings, and I am correcting them even in Photoshop or tweaking them. So it's a tool that I'm using as a storyboard artist that I am myself. But I would never go back to just like trying from like storyboarding from scratch. Like that's not the speed and the ability to try new things. And I think I'm not going back. So that's pre-production. In the post-production, which is interesting, I haven't done it, but I found myself thinking, okay, well, if this doesn't go perfect, let's say if the shot is too short, if I have to do a close-up that I don't have, if it's just a little reaction shot, maybe I can pull it off with AI. And that has lowered my stress enormously, because I'm dealing with $1 million productions that are high pressure. I have very limited time. I'm fighting weather. You're saying Middle East. I was shooting at 40 degrees weather. Models are fainting. The heat is terrible. And you're trying to make them do something very specific over and over. Well, now I'm thinking, okay, I have the likeness. Maybe, we can sign a contract so this talent knows that we are extending the shot and they're agreeing with it. And if that happens, maybe I get that little extra 2 seconds of the shot. Maybe I do a close-up that I don't have, right? Is there a way to still hire people and agree with them that to a certain extent, you're going to augment the work you've done with them with their agreement and under like a lawful contract? That already is lowering my stress about filmmaking.
I don't know if you saw that yesterday. I think VO3 from Google or DeepMind released with it basically lip syncs, but within the action, it doesn't leave the rest of the body static. There's actually some movement. And we're beginning to see, I think, the beginning of something which will be developing over the next few years to gain a level of realism, which is probably going to be very difficult to differentiate between something recorded for real with an actor and something generated with AI. As a director, do you think that there's still something innate in the actor which is always going to be replaceable, as even if it's perfect, the execution in terms of what the director wanted from that AI actor versus what that director wanted from the actor? Going back again also to what Justin was saying about, like the imitation, the synthesizer being able to replicate that orchestra, but John Williams will always use an instrumental orchestra. So I think I know your answer, but I want to hear your opinion.
Well, first, again, the same disclaimer. This is not what I want. This is not what I do, but this is what it is, right? I think this is my hot take. I think actors are not replaceable at all. And I don't think there will be.
You're making some friends right now, I think, as you say that.
I think actors are not replaceable. I think models are replaceable. And that's a hard truth. A lot of people right now are employed. I'm not talking about Kate Moss, right? I'm not talking about a life story. That I consider that like talent, an artist. I don't know, like someone who has a story behind them is a celebrity, right? Like I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the hundreds of people who are hired to be on a commercial, showing their face, showing a grin, holding a can, doing things that they most times do badly, right? And a lot of them are my dear friends. They're great. The ones that are my friends, though, oh my God, those are the best. But a lot of them aren't. And I think this is coming for them because it's very hard right now. I would say that it's very easy to see like AI acting. We can start seeing this emergency of AI acting, and it's very bad. It's very bad, and I think that there's so many things, and this would need another podcast to talk about why acting carries on so much nuance and so many little decisions from the actor that is irreplaceable. But models, when you see the output of an AI model and you compare that to talent on a commercial, is almost indistinguishable. And I would argue sometimes AI is better at certain commercials, right? So you see some people, like some basic vignette-based commercials are very replaceable. Well, of course, if you have an acting-based commercial, a comedy commercial, or something emotional where you have to commit to, and then that now we're talking about an actor, it's a different story. A lot, but that's not the bulk of it. The bulk of what we do in commercials is very replaceable. But I would argue everything is changing to a point that maybe commercials are irrelevant. Like commercials are in decline. So that kind of commercial anyway, where people are happy and showing lifestyle and an emotion is attached to a product in a world where everybody can go in and try to find the actual information about that product and choose more rationally. Well, what we are seeing for the last 10 years, commercials are in decline on the first place. So, before we clutch our pearls, we need to understand everything is changing and not just because of AI. There's a lot of things that AI just accelerate to a point. But I would argue that models are more at risk right now than actors on this ecosystem of creation, for sure.
I think your point is about this coming down to replaceability and the economics of this are really interesting to think about when it comes to that. Because like you said, I'm going to go back to music here for a second because Adam got us there and now I can't stop thinking about it. But when you look at songs, right? Songs have been 5 minutes. Songs have been 8 minutes. Songs have been longer and longer, and albums had a narrative from beginning to end that was thought about. And now, realistically, the art is the single, and the single should be 3 minutes because that's the optimal length for Spotify. And the economics start to drive some of those choices. So I can easily see how, to exactly your point, as we start thinking about how do we think about what storytelling is going to be, actually, if the technology is not able to deal with going to film, I'll go to that Goodfellas shot where you go into the restaurant and it's 2 minutes long and it's a single take, and how you actually did that is amazing. Getting that done with an AI actor? No, not yet. But if we can get quick shots, if you can put something together that's quick shots, then all of a sudden maybe we start to see different kind of flavors of directing that start to come out as people want to use these tools to the way that they are actually able to deliver. And that'll be interesting because that favors that kind of shortcut commercial type of narrative. I would ask, when you look at the work, you started at the beginning and you were like, there's very few things you can count on your fingers what you think is really, I'm going to ask what they are. When you look at the AI work that's out there, what are you watching making you jealous? Like, is there work that's making you jealous?
There's a part of me, I come from graphic design. I come from from photography, from watching movies, and I love aesthetics. So I don't want to put them down. There's a lot of people combining different visual ideas into shots that you haven't seen before, and that is exciting to me. Aesthetically, is very, very great. I'm not saying that's storytelling. I'm not saying that's anything of value, but I mean, yeah, it has value, but it doesn't have character. It's not artistic. I don't think intrinsically artistic is communicating anything. So I would argue not artistic value there. So there's a lot of people doing amazing stuff on that front, and you can see that. I've seen some music videos that I think are great and could not have been done before. And unfortunately, I don't remember the name of this one, but I can put it on the show notes later if you want. This guy is doing crazy music videos that are very, very poignant and about war. They're using techno music with images of war and dancing. It's like in a way that feels like a satire on contemporary culture I haven't seen before, and it could not have been done without this technology at all because the production value is huge. But I can give you two examples of people that I know, and one is in my life. One is my good friend Paul Trillo. So Paul has been experimenting with AI for the last couple of years. He's, I would say, maybe a household name in AI. He's part of Asteria Group, who's this amazing AI studio, are developing a new model with Moon Valley, this tech company. Interesting thing about this model is it's a clean model. So what they're doing there is they're licensing the data they train the model on. basically everybody who's on the data set has been paid for their work and agreed to be on the set and can remove themselves from the data set if they. That's a breakthrough in a way that I think is very important because it's an ethical approach to AI. Besides that, Paul is a great artist and he's been doing some amazing work, including short films and pieces and more artistic installation pieces that I would really recommend anyone watching this to go and see. He's a dear friend and one that is working on things that are artistically very valuable using these tools. But he's a very well-trained filmmaker and he came to the technology already with a lot of artistic baggage. That's one. The other one is there's a guy with a project called Neuravis, and I don't remember his name. He's a former writer from Adult Swim, the animation channel. He's an amazing writer and he's using this very well. He has this social media channel called Neuravis, like neural vision or business, whatever. This is the funniest thing I've seen in a long time, independently of AI. It feels like Rick and Morty. It feels like great animation, but it looks like an 80s monster show. It's kind of talking heads. The writing is great. And that's the bottom line is, when you have an amazing writer and you're executing with this, you're elevating the writing. Before you could do kind of like, if you would do like something like this on your own, I think he's a one person band, you would do very rudimentary characters like South Park. Now, with the same quality writing as South Park, you can create something that it's extremely funny and visually. So I think those are two examples of people using the technology in ways that are elevating their work, but they're people who are trained artists on their mediums and they master that before they moved into AI, if that makes sense.
Even though AI is creating a window and a doorway for people to get to a level of competency fast, it sounds like, in your view, there's still no replacing the "it takes 10,000 hours to learn your craft." That, the adage. So that craft still sits at the core of getting the best out of the tool.
I keep coming back to punk rock because maybe you don't need the 10,000 hours to create an amazing, culturally impactful, artistic project. But you do have to have honesty and you have to have authenticity and come with it with a spirit of experimenting. I don't know. I think that, and this is like a cranky old man howling, whatever that is. But it's just like, I think that the incentives on social media are not conducive to great works of art and not conducive to this technology being used in ways that is exciting, because everybody wants the quick hit. Like they're just being molded by the feedback they're getting from the social media engagement, right? So the algorithms are driving a lot of what is out there, and maybe a missing part of the picture. But my feeling is like, you give this technology to punk kids on the 90s and 80s, and you would get an incredible explosion of culture. Now, if I create something that is weird and maybe not that pleasant, and I put it online and nobody likes it, and then I do something that it's averaging more towards something everybody likes, the immediate reaction of kids is to just do the thing that everybody likes. And what you have is a monoculture that looks like the same. So I think the problem is not AI in that environment, but actually the actual distribution channels we're using for AI. So it's not like a cassette tape that I feel very lucky to get and part of a few group, but of the selected few that know about this band, like we did in the good old days, but is what everybody likes. That's the clout. And so what everybody likes is an average. So cool is always an average. It's never out of the norm, right? It's an agreement among parts that something is acceptable. That's, I think, the wrong set of incentives. So what I want to see is kids using this, maybe not 10,000 hours, but expressing themselves through it to create meaningful things. And I bet there's someone out there doing it, and we just need time. This is very new right now and expensive, I would argue. The entry level is still expensive, especially for image creation and video creation. Like maybe ChatGPT is free, but there's a lot of it that, it's
maybe
tough.
It doesn't take 10,000 hours to get to grips with, but it takes quite a few hours to trial and error. And once you get a hang of one image generator or music generator or video generator, there's another one that's doing something slightly better that you got to get your head around. By the time you've done that one and finished the little project, another one's come out in the same week. So I think there's also that challenge there. I would also say that I think, going to your point of the punk rock aspect of against, what everyone's doing and doing something authentic. there's a tendency with AI image generators and Gen AI to try and simulate, like that synthesizer simulating an orchestra, like that drone shot with runway or whatever that looks impeccable and looks 4K and so on. It's like, no, actually where it actually excels is in the stuff that might not be so replicable in real life. I actually find in the, like a kind of new form of accidental surrealism that's happened through the hallucinations that some young creators have picked up on. And they're like, yeah, I love this kind of weird, like morphing hallucination. I'm just going to play with it and I'm going to stretch it. And maybe I think there's actually like a seed of something coming from that, like a new realism that pops out from people not wanting to do the norm of AI, of trying to simulate two actors speaking as if they were in an action movie or whatever, no? And I think that's maybe where I'm finding some really young kids doing stuff on social media that you go, that's horrible, but I want to see more.
So we need the David Lynch of this generation to make their appearance. I think that that's a fantastic conversation and really a lot of value in what you're doing. And I'm excited to see how your work continues to be influenced. And Adam, you too, as you start to play more with these tools and look at it. You've already given me a little bit here in terms of this question, but we tend to want to wrap with one question, which is, what's the one thing that's irreplaceable about a human being? You already said that actors are irreplaceable in your mind, so you're not allowed to say that. I'm going to ask you to go beyond that. I'd like to ask both of you this question. What do you think is the one thing that really is, as AI comes for different roles and different things and creates new capability, what's the one thing that's really irreplaceable about a human being?
I'm going to go and be pretentious about this one, but I think human struggle is irreplaceable, right? So the emotions and the life journey that comes with suffering human existence and going through, enduring it and having and finding happiness. And that is what I think it's irreplaceable, and what I would say is not replicable. It could be imitated, but what we as humans want is to have basically empathize with the human experience of someone else. So that is something that is completely replaceable. Like when I look at a work of art, I want to know that behind the work of art, and it could be an animated film, so it doesn't have to be a documentary, but behind that work of art, there's the intent of a human expressing, overcoming struggle, and which is at the core of what storytelling is, the hero journey, all those things that we know. That is not something you can synthesize. You can execute on a synthetic way, right? But behind that, you want the meta story. And this is important because you may not get that from the work of art. There's something we value very much is like, who did this? And when we hear who did this, what we want to hear is like, what were the conditions in the life of that person who led to this outcome? That process is irreplaceable. When you try to replace that and it becomes a business for a lot of people who are just doing this out of craft, and they're doing this out of their professional knowledge of how things are executed and what is the best outcome, what you do is you diminish, generally speaking, you diminish the impact that has on audiences and people. People don't really care about like a generic thing that nobody cared about while putting it together. They care about things that were important to those who are putting them together. And you can do a Marvel movie, just not to shit on Marvel, which I love to, but you can rank the Marvel movies just as I'm using that as a most extreme example of commercial filmmaking. You can rank them among who do you know are behind the movies, who do you know what stories are behind that, and what are the movies that were just like fillers, right? This gives you the ability to be just to create filler in a way that we haven't seen before. But that doesn't mean that we can't use it to execute on ideas and experiences that we had as artists. And I think that will hold water. That will be meaningful to other audiences and people out there.
It's funny. I think I can up the pretentiousness on that because I was actually thinking that.
Let's do it, baby. Bring it on.
I was thinking of how Greek tragedy, here we go, it was built on two key pillars, eros and thanatos. So love and death, desire for love, fear of death, and vice versa, sometimes depending on the story. So storytelling actually linked to that struggle that you're talking about, Nico, that all human beings go through, is something that we can empathize with when we see it and watch a movie and we go, you're watching the movie, but you're watching the movie maker. If the movie maker is not human, it lacks substance. It lacks, I want to know that Werner Herzog, what he buys in the corner shop is probably super interesting too, especially when he asks for something, you know? I want to have that connection with the art and the artist, but I think it's also driven by intention. And I think AI has not reached AGI yet. We don't have an AI that has an intention to, you turn it on and had a terrible night when I was turned off and I want to talk about it and I'm going to express it through this story. That still hasn't happened. And I think that's what's irreplaceable for me right now. I don't know if in a few years' time, if we have this conversation again, remember you said that.
We'll do this in a few years' time, and I'll call you both out on exactly what you've just said. In seriousness, look, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I am a lover of stories. I think we all are. We've watched them change shape and format. And Nico, I think that you at the forefront of how they're being crafted and how they're being put together and what they mean. I love the fact that you're bringing both a human lens to it, which is desirable in what you want and what you think is an ideal future, but also a realistic economic lens to it to understand what are the pressures that are going to drive this. And hopefully we can balance that. I appreciate both of your time and thanks so much. This has been a great Airy Topics.
Thank you, Nico.